I want to thank you for getting on the call with me today. Our time goes back about 13 years. And it's interesting that we've come to this point where a lot of people are saying that right now that we're needed more than ever. And it's interesting that we've been doing this work in the midst of everything else that's been going on. We've been consistently doing this work no matter what. So it's kind of like nothing new for us right now, right?
It's true. This is nothing new. We've known each other for years. We've both supported each other's work. We've both been sort of after society to say, pay attention. We have some self-help techniques for you. And unfortunately, it took a crisis to actually wake people up and start to pay attention. However, if you look at the history of humanity, it almost always takes a crisis before a big change can occur. So we're here. The crisis is here. Let's figure out how to help people get through this.
And that's actually a part of my story is crisis. Like when I first met you 13 years ago, I was dealing with my own health crisis and dealing with anxiety and depression and panic attacks, and I had a back injury. So that's what led me out to Arizona and to go to Brain State and where I met you. But the interesting thing about that is before I even came out that way, I had watched this website that's called Conscious Media Network. And they had like so many different people on there talking about alternative health thought processes. And you were one of those people talking about trauma release exercises. So when I came out to Brain State and I heard the name David Berceli, I said, that's that guy who does the shaking thing that I saw on Conscious Media. And I was really excited about that because I really got to do both modalities with the brain training. And then I actually walked through trauma release with you at that time. And 13 years later, I've still been doing trauma release, which is just coming out of my mouth saying that is just like, wow, that's been a long time to be doing this modality and to have met you. So can you describe to people exactly, well, what is trauma release and how did you come about that method?
Okay, so very briefly, what trauma release is a series of simple exercises that should be able to be done by almost anybody. That's why they're simple. The exercises evoke a shaking mechanism that's naturally genetically encoded in our body. And we all know this mechanism. When a dog is frightened in a thunderstorm, you watch it shake. When I'm nervous and I might be holding a piece of paper, you might see my hand shake, or my voice might quiver. Or if I'm standing in front of a large audience giving a presentation, my legs might shake. We all know this shaking mechanism, either from our own personal experience or from seeing it in other people. We know when somebody shakes, something's wrong. What I discovered, because I lived in war in Africa and the Middle East, many countries, I was constantly kind of forced to look at it. It was kind of thrown in my face. People tremoring out of terror. I was tremoring out of terror and fear. So that shaking mechanism, which we've all commonly seen socially, I was forced to pay attention to it because it was constantly thrown up to me. And so what I did was I watched it and experienced it in my own body, and I realized that this shaking mechanism is not a part of the dysfunction of my anxiety. It's exactly the opposite. It's my nervous system trying to calm me down from the anxious state that I'm in. So when I came back to the United States, I began researching this and discovered that the human body tremors when it gets overstimulated. And the reason it tremors is the overstimulation is caused by a huge surge of adrenaline in the bloodstream. And so when that adrenaline is pumped in there, the nervous system immediately says, I got to tremor this out. I got to shake this down because I'm overstimulated. And that's usually because we now in our social structure, when we're anxious, it's no longer running from a lion or a tiger, where the running burns off the adrenaline.
Right.
I'm anxious because I don't have a job, or my finances are bad, or my boss is angry at me, or I'm going to get laid off. All of those different reasons, but we can't run from them and we can't fight them. So we just keep increasing our surge of adrenaline. And so what we
Right.
needed, David, and this is what you and I talked about a lot, is we need to make this genetically encoded mechanism available to every person without needing therapists or guidance. We need to make it available to the general population so that everybody learns that built within their system is the capacity to calm themselves down and to self-regulate their emotional state. And that's what you do with your work,
Right.
and that's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing with my work.
So why is it that, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it that non-domesticated animals don't have trauma? Is that correct?
It's very interesting, yes. Animals in the wild do not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because even though every day they live in the possible threat of being eaten and killed.
Right.
Every day they live with that threat. But what happens is when animals in the wild are faced with that threat, they can usually run from it. So they actually use that adrenaline. And when they run and finally when they're safe, after they're safe, their body tremors out any additional adrenaline. Then they lay down and relax. But domesticated animals don't have that opportunity. That's why when dogs shake during a thunderstorm, they're in a house and they don't have the place to run to that would make themselves feel safe when they were outside. Right. So they never burn that off. And so they end up sitting on the sofa just tremoring because there's nowhere to go. So
I had a German Shepherd. I had a German Shepherd years ago. He used to thunderstorms. He would go in a room and he would just shake. Those are like fireworks. Like he would just shake.
Exactly right.
And I always, at a young age, I always wondered. Well, I thought that he was scared because that's the traditional thought process is that specifically if you're a man and you're shaking, I'm afraid. But really it's my body trying to regulate itself, not so much fear.
What's interesting is if you're a man and you're shaking, you're healthier than the man who is not shaking. That's right. Kind of interesting. We've attributed negative attributes to the shaking. I'm weak, I'm vulnerable, I'm afraid, I'm insecure, all of that. When the shaking mechanism, when I see somebody shaking, my God, you're the healthiest one in the group because everyone else is in a state of freeze. But you're the one who's healthy.
Yeah. And so my body was very locked. As a kid, I used to chew pin tops. I used to chew ice cubes. I used to chew my t-shirt. My t-shirt used to be soaked because I would chew it. Yeah. So I think at that time, what I was trying to do was trying to regulate.
Everybody will find a way to try to, let's say, down-regulate. So they might have repeated patterns of, chewing on their fingernails and all the things you talked about. And that's common. But what I discovered is that when people like you learn to activate this tremor mechanism and you use it regularly, all those behaviors just disappear because you've given your body what it needed was to down-regulate, and you used its own system to do that rather than something external.
Yeah, because I used to grind my teeth. And that, again, so it's like energy can never be created or destroyed. It only can be transformed. So if you don't dissipate that energy out of the body, it becomes. So can you talk to that about how that, if you don't, what's the problems that happens when you don't discharge this energy?
Well, the biggest problem is if we increase anxiety, we're actually decreasing the capacity of our immune system. And so we're actually weakening ourselves so that we're more vulnerable to things like even just falling or getting colds or having higher levels of anxiety because we have higher levels of adrenaline and cortisol, but we're not discharging them. So if we don't discharge regularly, our entire system becomes disrupted and we actually become weaker. See, and that's what we have to be aware of, particularly in this time of the virus. Okay, we want as strong of an immune system as possible. And so we need to reduce our anxiety around being locked up at home and, all the social changes that are occurring. Let's reduce the anxiety. We could actually get through this in a healthy, calm manner.
Right. So is it that when you go into fight or flight or freeze response, your immune system is it completely shut off or is it just partially shut off?
No, it's just partially shut off. I think in one of your videos I was watching, you talk about when we go into some sort of freeze or dissociative response, all of the blood flow adjusts itself in our body. So it will become, in a sense, even though the levels of anxiety are higher, we'll have reduced reaction to that. Whereas if you have a regular fight or flight response, the blood flow goes out into the extremities of the body, so you can either fight or run away from it. And that's how it gets all sort of burned off. But when you're in a freeze or dissociative response, you still have high levels of anxiety, just that they're frozen into the core of the structure. See? And remember, David, when I first worked with you, the amount of movement and shaking you got in your body was huge, which actually showed us how much of that energy was stuck in the core of you and was waiting to explode its way out. And then when it did, you actually felt that sensation of calmness.
Yeah, and I went and played like 5 games of basketball the next day. And a friend of mine said, "Did you start training or something?" Because before, like a week before, I couldn't even play maybe 1 game.
Right.
So my energy was just locked in my body. So I always find it amazing that people say do the Red Bulls and energy drinks. It's like what your body is energy. It's just where the resource is going to.
Yeah, it's true. Most people have a lot of energy, even people that are tired. They have a lot of energy. It's just locked in their structure and they can't get it out. Now, the other positive value for doing the TRE or shaking the body is it takes very tight muscle tissue that we're even unaware of, chronic stress muscles, and it actually shakes them to loosen them. And so now you've got even greater flexibility physically in your body. So the fact that you could go out and play basketball so easily right after you did TRE is it did 2 things. It opened up all that stuck energy and gave it to you, and it relaxed your muscle tissues that you could be more flexible and therefore more athletic in the sense of your body could now move more easily.
What about the people who think that, well, I work out, I run, I lift weights, and I made my legs, because a lot of people, they'll work out their legs to where it starts to shaking. Is that still a function of down regulating, or is it because you didn't activate it, from the brain stem first, or, the psoas muscle? Is it still the same?
They're slightly 2 different things. But first of all, let's take all of these weightlifters. I work with a lot of military people and a lot of special services military, weightlifters as well, that sort of thing. And the problem is they have tight muscle, but it's not flexible. And so that's a disadvantage to the muscle. So you can have good muscle tone, even strong muscles, but they also have to be flexible. That's the healthiest state. So that when I work with exercise people, usually because they're lifting weights, they have big pecs and big biceps, but they have weak backs. And that's how they injure themselves, because they're overworking only one section of the body. And when they overwork it, it gets really tight. And then those tight muscles pull on other muscles that aren't being worked as well. Even if they do a full routine and they're exercising all their muscle groups, my question is, are those strong muscles able to be flexible as well? And if they're not, you're damaging the structure of the body. I work with a lot of people who are in the Olympics, okay? And what happens in Olympic training, athletes, is they usually train one side of their body to do their skill or their sport.
Right.
But then the other side is not the same. And now what do? They get back problems, hip problems, knee problems, and that's because they're imbalanced in the way they do their training. So that's
just overcompensating in other areas, and then another area has to overcompensate because you've overcompensated this area.
Right. Yeah. So one side's going to be stronger and one side's going to be weaker, and that's going to cause a pull through the entire spinal column, particularly the neck and the hips. Then all of a sudden you're going to discover, and this is fascinating, their injuries are almost always on the same side. So they'll injure their knee, then the hip, and then their shoulder, and they're all on the left side. And what side is strongest? The right side, because that's the side they use to train in their sport. So it's very evident that there has to be a balancing going on, and that's what the tremor mechanism does. It takes the tight, strong muscle, relaxes them so they're more flexible, so it allows these weaker muscles that aren't trained to actually become stronger. So it creates a balance.
So does the brain recognize trauma, weightlifting or high explosive sports as trauma?
No, it doesn't make a distinction. It just knows that there's an imbalance being created in the structure. And the brain, connected with the nervous system, is designed to constantly create balance. We have to have symmetry only for the purpose of survival, because if my body is balanced, I can run from the tiger better. See, so I'm probably most likely the one that's going to survive, and not the person who has an imbalance. Okay.
Right.
So the brain is designed to say, wait, there's something pulling on one side to me. I got to get the other side to be balanced, or I'm in danger. So the brain, the nervous system, central pattern generators in the spine, they're all about flexibility and balance in the structure. And when we don't do that, that becomes an anxious state for the body, saying, I can't run from the tiger. And so that's the state we put ourselves in. Now, one last thing, though, David, about your question about when people are lifting heavy weights or something and then their arms shake because the weight's too heavy. That's a different issue. What they're really showing, the muscle is saying, that's too much, I can't handle that. You're pushing too hard. I've reached my limit, see? And a lot of that has to do with lactic acid buildup.
Okay. So that's not necessarily a neurogenic tremor.
It is a neurogenic tremor, but it's serving a different purpose. See, just like when you shiver when you're cold, that's a neurogenic tremor too, but it's activated because the body is cold and you shiver to actually increase the heat in the body, see. So there are over 10 or 15 different types of neurogenic tremors in the body, all serving different purposes. Ours, as you experienced, is to activate that tremor mechanism more in a passive manner when we lay down on the floor, and then we let the tremor guide us in how it's going through the structure, and then it informs us what muscles are tight or weak or too strong or too flaccid, and then we work with that. So the tremor mechanism is the guide, and we're sort of passively following its direction.
Can you briefly talk about trauma? Because trauma really is a word that is conditioned to us in a way that like is just like something very severe. But what are different types of trauma, and have we all been kind of traumatized in life?
What my belief is that every human person is traumatized in life, just to varying degrees and for different reasons. See, trauma could be something as simple as, your parents are playing with you in the swimming pool. You come down the slide, you're 2 years old, and daddy misses you. He was going to catch you, but he missed you. And you go under the water, and he doesn't get you soon enough. And the body can go into a trauma because at 2 years old, it doesn't know that daddy's going to pick you up, see? And so the organism itself knows it can't breathe. So it already activates a traumatic state. You can go into freeze or panic or hysteria. See, so many traumas are innocent traumas. And so the human organism is designed, we're lucky, it's designed to know it will experience trauma. It knows how to survive and endure trauma and even evolve as a result of trauma, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So every human organism is traumatized. What if you're in a car accident at the age of 16? You don't hurt yourself, but maybe you get a neck injury from it. Not a serious one, but it's one that bothers you. Well, that's a trauma. That's a blunt trauma to the body. And then 4 years later, you discover you have to go to a chiropractor because your neck is in alignment. So we have traumas all through life. I could have trauma right now, anxiety, depending on how big my anxiety gets. What if I don't have enough money to pay my mortgage or my rent, and I don't have money for my children to have food? That's a trauma that causes.
That's a lot of people.
But it causes us to shut down because I don't want strong emotions at that time. I want to numb out. I'm afraid. I'm I don't want to show my children I'm afraid. That's what parents do all the time. So what
Right.
do? They hold in their fear and their anxiety. And single mothers or single fathers, they have nobody to express that to. So it stays
Right.
inside over and over as a way of protecting the children, but the parent themselves is becoming highly traumatized.
And so I found myself over the last 13 years really working when I talk to people about, when they say heal trauma, really all I'm doing is down regulating my nervous system, getting my muscles to relax, getting the emotion to. So can we talk about that for a moment? Like when the muscles do relax and the emotion surfaces,
Right.
and what's that about?
See, I expect that once we come out of freeze or we come out of numbness, all of a sudden our nervous system starts to downregulate. What immediately begins to happen is the diaphragm and chest cavity, which is where we hold when we're in panic or fear. So we hold our breathing, they begin to pulsate. And when they begin to pulsate, we call that emotion. And it's usually crying or anger or whatever. But all it really is to the human organism, oh, great, I can breathe, I can come back to my life again. So that when people come out of freeze or numbness, they will almost always have strong emotions. And they're the emotions that were stuck inside, and we should be happy that they're expressing themselves. Now, we have to find appropriate ways to give them expression, but that's a sign of health. When people who are frozen or numb or dissociated, when they start to have emotions, that's a great sign. They're coming back to life. We just have to help them to learn how to appropriately direct those emotions.
Right. And it seems like a lot of people have a hard time with dealing with their emotions. And I feel like it's because there's so much of a backlog of it.
Yes.
That feeling just the smallest of your emotion feels like a big thing because there's so much unresolved within your body.
Right. Here's an example. If I lived with an alcoholic father for 18 years as a child when I was home, for 18 years, I had to control myself not to let my emotions out because it was dangerous. They'd be reacted to. I couldn't run from my father. I couldn't fight my father. So look at 18 years of my life. There's not one specific event, but for 18 years, I learned how not to be me, but to hide me out of safety from something else that was dangerous outside of me, see? And many of us grew up in those sorts of situations in childhood for one reason or another. So yes, by the time I became 30, I had 30 years of traumas that I had to let out. And when you first start to do this, it feels like it's going to be endless. The rage, the anger, the hurt, the sadness, the pain. But believe me, and I agree with what you say, it's like, no, there's no such thing as just healing the trauma. It's taking trauma, letting it go through our system, and then I believe that we actually mature from that process. See, and
you call that post-traumatic growth?
Yeah, well, that's the new science that's out, is there is such a thing as post-traumatic growth. And we know it already because if you've met somebody soldiers at war, when they come back, they'll tell you, ever since that time, my whole life has changed. I love my wife or children. I live life differently. It's almost as I know any day now, life could be ended, and therefore it makes it more precious.
So we were like those animals in the wild, and we actually shook after every event that we deemed stressful. We probably wouldn't have the, post-traumatic, because what they call a post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's almost like society all have some form of post-traumatic stress if we're still reacting to something in the past, right?
Right. Well, now they're dropping the word disorder, so they're just calling it post-traumatic stress symptoms. Because what they're recognizing is that's not a disorder. It's actually ordered perfectly well. Meaning the body did whatever it needed to survive the threatening event. But here's our problem. After it's used all those defensive mechanisms, then after the event is over, the threatening event is over, we should let go of all those mechanisms that it needed to use to survive. And then we go back to our relaxed state. But that's where we're getting stuck. We're not letting go of them. And that's the value of this tremor mechanism, is it takes us and takes all these defense mechanisms and says, great, okay, start tremoring, and very slowly we're going to release all those mechanisms so we can go back to our calm state and live life again.
Right. So the world needs to tremor right now.
Well, I believe, but see, I believe animals, mammals, and we're still partly mammal, we still have partly mammalian developmental genes in us. Mammals need to tremor because the tremor helps their nervous system to downregulate. So any human being who's living under stress, and potentially that's all of us, even people who have money are experiencing stress right now.
Right.
Everybody under stress needs to tremor, not because it's like a healthy routine to put in your life or something like that, but because it's the organism's mechanism to keep the healthy cycle happening in our bodies.
And it seems like in our culture, in our society, that we are overwhelming our systems and shutting off natural order of our systems. I mean, really, if we just look at the world and how we treat the earth, we do the same thing to the earth. So we're definitely doing the same things to our bodies and not giving it the ability to express its natural self.
It's very true to see that we are being overwhelmed. Even without this virus, our systems are being overwhelmed by fast-paced, stronger, better, make money, do all these things. It's all aggressive behaviors. Where do all those aggressive behaviors come from? Why didn't we develop a behavior saying, sit and be silent and quiet inside, and the very few movements you make towards life will be actually more productive than the 17 excited movements that you're making in life? But see, that's not what our society promotes. If you want to be rich and healthy and strong or whatever, you've got to be above, you've got to be better, you've got to be the best. And I'm saying, yes, I agree, all that's true, but there are other ways to be the best other than pushing your way through society.
Right. Being able to use your energy in a more resourceful way. Exactly. And that's something that I've found for myself for the last 13 years, where I want to be in the flow, not in the hustle.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's how you developed your company and your product. You took these 13 years and you slowly let yourself evolve. And in that evolution, ideas came. And then how do I enact that creative idea? And there was a balance between getting the creative idea and just holding on to it to let it sort of mature. And then, oh, now I know how to implement that creative idea.
Yeah. So now I'm able to look at systems again that we talk about in the body and say, okay, everybody comes to you. And as you know, everybody's coming to you with a million different symptoms. But what stays the same is you're working with the same system. Symptoms, so it's systems over symptoms. Right.
That's true. It's always one thing going on. It's just expressing itself in a multitude
of ways. It's a tree with 1,000 different leaves, but it's still at its core as a tree. Right?
Exactly right. That's great. That's great insight. That's actually wisdom that takes complexity and simplifies it. Okay, one thing. Well, if there's one thing going on, I can manage that. But if I'm looking at all the 13,000 different symptoms, then it becomes unmanageable and overwhelming.
Right. So, and talking about that in Inception, bringing all those things over the years, I've always, and you've called me at times and said, hey, I got somebody to work with you. And even though I never really had it as a service that I sold, I did it as I needed to with clients. But now, over the last few years, I've always wanted to incorporate TRE into what we do. And I think now is a time to be able to do that in a massive way, because technology is advanced in the last 13 years, where before we didn't have this ability to do Skype, and maybe the internet connection wasn't fast enough. So what me and you have proposed to do is to be able to take groups of people, up to 12 people, and start doing trauma release through Skype, or through Zoom or whatever, basically through the web.
What's wonderful about our relationship together if you look at it, you've been focusing on the neurofeedback component. So we're talking about the brain, and when we change the neural processing of the brain, it actually changes physiology. And then I'm working from physiology, and if we change that, it changes the brain. So that we are demonstrating there's a dual pathway here, and both are extremely important to address, because if we address the human person from both dimensions, we're strengthening each other's dimensions so that the recovery and the repair can be much more influential and powerful and honestly faster. But it's not faster in the tech that we're speeding it up. We're just taking all of those dimensions and letting them speak to each other, and by themselves, they make a faster recovery. That's what we're doing.
So some of the benefits of trauma release too as well, because I've seen people come to you that have things like fibromyalgia or all types of like autoimmune issues, the anxieties, the depressions. And within sessions, you see people with great relief. Because can you talk about some of those things that you see in the field?
Yeah, people claim all sorts of, if you will, healings or recoveries from doing TRE. And what I think is really happening, as we spoke earlier, I think what we're doing is we're taking their highly elevated nervous system and we're slowly bringing it down. And as we do, then their immune system slowly begins to increase. And I think it's the increase in the immune system that's actually having the effect of their injury or their psycho-emotional complaints. So fibromyalgia, or chronic headaches, things like that, they're often the result of not having a strong enough immune system that could fight off some of those illnesses. So that's what I think we're seeing. Not that TRE heals all of those. It's doing one thing. It's increasing the autonomic nervous system and increasing the person's resiliency, which then it can fight off all those other things that are attacking their body.
It's amazing how, like, because my background is in network engineering and management in computers. And so when I used to go to the computer, you go to Control-Alt-Delete. You ever done that before? Control-Alt-Delete, you go to your task manager is what it's called. Right. And within your task manager, you can see how your CPU's resources is using itself. Way back in the day when I first installed Norton antivirus on the computer, this is probably around 1996. So when I installed that Norton onto our computer, Norton was running in the background, trying to protect my computer from viral threats.
Right.
But the problem was my computer was like at a standstill. It went super slow.
Right.
And it wasn't until I went and deactivated Norton that I was able to use my computer at the same speed and efficiency as I was before. So I look at what trauma release or any modality that we kind of like do that's all about rebalancing the system is turning off the defense mechanism, right? And just giving us back our natural order, whether it be, I now can focus and concentrate. I now have memory again. I now am happy, because now I'm not being choked by my systems being drained in other ways. Do you find that analogy to be accurate to what's going on?
I think it's a wonderful analogy, and I think it's a great analogy for a younger generation who, in their mind, they already grew up with computers. And so making that analogy from computer to the body, I think could be really useful for them to understand both what we're talking about and why should they be paying attention to what we're talking about. And that's because our system, essentially, our nervous system runs like a computerized system. So does the brain. And so that analogy, I think, fits perfect for them and may be an enticement for them to say, okay, let me see what he's saying about my computer system and how do I apply that to my body? And is that analogy correct? And even if they just try that, they'll discover it is correct.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger enticements too is because of in relationships and how you have these dynamic plays of a person who's I've never really seen someone who's in fight or flight or someone who's in fight mode in a relationship. And if you do find that, they're fighting each other, right?
Right.
But it's typically, I always find this fight person or this flight person in a relationship with this person who's in freeze. And
Yeah.
they keep playing this broken, it's not even a completed cycle, this broken cycle over and over and over. And I think they're really trying to down regulate each other. It just never happens.
Well, it never happens because what they do is they keep replaying the cycle. You know, that terrible phrase that we have in our culture, who wears the pants in the family? Now, I don't like it because it's suggesting men should be wearing pants, etc. But the point behind it is who's the dominant one? And usually what we find in a lot of relationships is one person is a very strong fight or flight. That's what they used in life. That's what saved them. And they marry the person that's frozen and dissociated. That's what they needed to do to survive life too. And so because the dissociated one loves the energy of the fight or flight one. And the fight or flight one loves the calmness of the dissociated one. But they just keep replaying that cycle over and over their whole life long. And of course, what they thought was love in the beginning now becomes a dissatisfying relationship. And so we're all stuck in this. The whole world is. It isn't just one or two people and people have bad relations. People are married for 50 years could be stuck in this cycle as well.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do, David, is we're trying to get people to recognize you're a human organism. You pulsate, there's aliveness, and when you have the greatest pulsation and aliveness and it's balanced, you will have a better relationship with you and a better relationship with your family, friends, and the rest of the world. And so we have an inner pulsation that is life, and that inner pulsation interact with the external pulsation of life. And that's the only way to ever have happiness. When I'm pulsating okay, and I'm around people that are pulsating okay as well. That's fulfillment. That's inner peace. That truly is what happiness is about.
And why does it just seem like some people get addicted to the pattern that they're in? Like they don't, like if they maybe even start to down regulate, they need to do something to bring them back up, because coming down is like scary.
A lot of military people actually that I work with, when they come down, it actually feels boring. They overstimulate because they're used to a high adrenal reaction in their body, see?
Right.
And so when that adrenaline starts to come down, they interpret that as life is boring or dull or meaningless, see? Because they don't know how to live here. What I think has happened in our society is maybe 50 years ago, this was the baseline of our state. Now our baseline is up here. People are born into an anxious culture. They don't even know this baseline down here. And so when they start to explore this area, they think it's dull and boring. So we continually re-stimulate ourselves instead of exploring more and more calm levels within ourselves. We keep overstimulating ourselves because we're afraid, honestly, to meet ourselves inside. That's the whole thing. Because in that, if we go down this level, that's where the pain and the sadness and the fear and loneliness and anxiety exist. Right. But we need to go there to resolve that, and then we can live at a more calm state.
So what do you think about the culture that you said something, we're born into an anxious culture right now, and I feel like the social media and the amount of stimulation that we're taking in, do you think that amount of stimulation that we're constantly taking in is creating a level of anxiety within us as well?
Yeah, it strongly increases it, but actually it's designed to increase it, because the more we're stimulated, the more we live in a state of anxiety. Who benefits from that? Pharmaceutical companies, businesses. They get more work out of us as they're working us. They're discovering there's a downside to that. They have more injuries as well and more sick leave as well.
Right.
But we'll buy more things as a way of numbing ourselves out. So overstimulating human organisms is to the benefit of all of those companies, news medias, etc., that are overstimulating us. They take advantage of that, and they gain from that, see? Because what happens if you're a calm, quiet person and you're living at home, you turn off the TV and say, I don't need the news, I just want to sit here and relax. You don't buy products, you don't go out, you don't engage in spending money, you're not sick anymore, you're living a quiet, calm, healthy life. They don't want you to do that, they need you to be overstimulated.
Right, and so the thing is, to understand that they understand neurophysiology.
Oh, yeah.
They understand how to manipulate neurophysiology. And while me, you, and the rest of the gang that's a part of this whole, we wouldn't call it healers or whatever,
Right.
pushing back and saying, do less, calm
Right.
down, relax.
Right.
And
Believe me, David, marketing companies have had neurofeedback 15 or 20 years before it ever became available to the general public. They already had it. They already knew how to get us addicted. They had neurofeedback machines testing us. So they already knew our psyche and how our neurology and physiology work. And so they knew how to manipulate us to the state they wanted us to be in to their advantage. And like I'm saying, what happened if all of us just sat at home and said, I'm happy with what I have. I don't need to buy anything. I love my children. I'm going to sit and play with them today. I'm going to breathe and enjoy my life. That's it. Well, they lose.
Yeah, the interesting thing is I grew up in a community in Detroit that was very tight-knit. I knew all my neighbors.
Yeah.
I had great friends in there. It was safety built into it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything too much outside of a maybe 1-2 mile radius, but I was so happy. I had so much fun. And so as I grew up, I kept hearing this message that you need this car, you need this house, you need to take these trips, you need this woman, you need all these things to be happy. But I'm like, wait, I was happy when I didn't know anything outside of a 2 mile radius and I maybe had a couple dollars in my pocket. And now you're telling me the opposite. And that's why I really haven't bought into that, because I know what I've already experienced. So I find peace in myself,
Right.
you know, and being of service, of being of value. And I think once people can calm down, they can get in touch with that. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the float tank, sensory deprivation, and you get in touch with that, and you sell your cleverness and you purchase bewilderment, as Rumi said.
Right.
Like, I'm so amazed at certain little things, like even more so now, I'm just amazed, just us being able to talk through this screen. Like, how does it do that? Yeah. Like, I'm amazed at the small things, but when you're stuck with all of this stuff, you're not amazed at stuff anymore. It's just another thing.
Yeah, this may be one of the upsides from this virus, and where we have to isolate. Maybe people are going to realize, wow, playing with my kids and being in the house and we're laughing and joking and we're getting along, maybe that feels nicer than go out and buying things in a shopping mall and sending the kids off to some sport thing or something like that. Maybe we'll get people to go back to family values and say, I really like my kids and I like being around them. Now I'm forced to do it, but the experience itself may begin to change people's consciousness. So like you said, I'm really happy inside just with my family. I don't need to go out and do things or buy things anymore.
And TRE and brain training and those things helped me years ago, because when I first did brain training and TRE, one of the things I noticed a week later was my desire for things. Like I had one desire for a car, like it was gone. And I was sitting looking for it. Like, what happened to it? Why don't I care anymore? Yeah. It's because I really didn't want the car. I just wanted what the car was going to bring me, which is a better sense of self in myself. Yeah. But I found that better sense of self within myself. Right. And I didn't need it anymore. So I think that what we're doing together and being able to bring this to the African American community, because we've talked extensively about that, and they haven't had access to this tool that you've created, this resource. So we're going to bring that into the community so that they can have access to that. And the great thing about TRE is, what I always loved about it is that it doesn't cost anything once you learn how to do it.
Yeah. Well, see, that's what's really important, because TRE was actually born in Africa. That's where I was living, see? Right. And that's the population I was exploring. I was the only white man for like thousands of miles around. And those are the human beings who helped me understand how is the human person natural? I found when I was in Africa and I lived in multiple countries there, I thought these people, they're living in their bodies a different way than people in the Western world were. They're living differently. And I had the chance to both feel that experience with them and then explore that experience with them. And that's how I learned about the tremor mechanism, actually. So it truly was from observing cultures that were not so caught up in this Western world of consumerism and external expression. Because what you said is very important, and this is the bottom line for both of us, David. You said, when I got calm inside, my external movement reduced. My external needs and desires reduced. If we want to help people feel a sense of peace and calmness and relaxation, we have to get them to go inside, which means coming out of their freeze and their dissociation, feeling calm in themselves, and all that external movement that they've been doing because of the high anxiety, that'll all go away. And they will finally find happiness isn't from going outward. And we have to help them get to that place. And I'm excited to work with you to bring it to the African-American community in the United States, which I haven't been able to access yet. So this is wonderful.
So that's great. So I want to thank you for getting on the call with me and spending time with me. And I appreciate your mentorship over the years and sticking with me and always remembering me, because we were basically created for this moment and this time to help humanity really move forward, move from what I call from vanity to sanity.
Oh, I love that. Well, David, I think just our relationship is itself the example. We waited, we matured, we kept working, we stayed in touch 13 years. And now the time has come with the richness of us to do some sort of movement externally. Had we done it 10 years ago, we probably
it wouldn't have been accepted.
Right in our relationship with ourselves.
Right.
So it's like, oh, it took that amount of time, but that amount of time was worth taking to get to the place where we are. And now this is exciting for both of us. Now we can move forward with our activities. Great.
So everybody who's going to see this is going to know that in a couple of weeks, probably sometime next week, we'll start to work with people through, we're going to work with 12 participants. We're going to do about $20 charge just to, come onto the course. And typically the TRE session is around how long?
They're usually about an hour long. Now that doesn't mean they tremor that long. We talk about it. I make sure that they're okay and comfortable. Then we tremor. And then after we're done tremoring, then we process what was that experience like so we can all grow from it together.
And from that first initial experience too, people can begin to take that what they learned and start to do that on their own and come back to get more guidance. Because even after 13 years, you worked with me that one day and I was able to unlock my back. So I had been doing trauma release for 13 years, so it actually wasn't moving, but working with us, actually the creator, but practitioners can give you a greater sense of what's happening in your body to help move you along in a more effective way. So they'll be able to come on, they'll take that tool, be able to use it and come back to get more guidance when they need it. So that's a great thing about it as well.
Wonderful. I'm excited. Let's do this, David. Let's make it.
All right. Sounds good. So until next time, guys.